I felt my face flush hot. Ray, you know that's garbage. I'm a civil engineer. I know better than anyone how to maintain a septic system. I know, Jake, but I still have to document everything by the book. Mind if I take a look around? For the next hour, Ray conducted the most thorough inspection I'd ever seen. He tested water samples, measured distances, photographed everything, and even used a probe to check soil composition around the septic drain field. The whole time, I caught glimpses of Karen watching from her back deck, cell phone pressed to her ear. "Well," Ray said finally, packing up his equipment, "your system is textbook perfect. Whoever filed this complaint either doesn't know what they're talking about or they're deliberately wasting county resources. Can you tell me who filed it?" Anonymous tip, but he lowered his voice. The complaint form had a lot of technical details that most people wouldn't know. Whoever wrote this has some knowledge of septic systems and county regulations, or access to someone who does. Ray nodded grimly. "Jake, off the record, I'd be real careful. Someone's playing games here, and they've got enough influence to get priority processing on complaint investigations." After he left, I stood in my driveway, feeling the noose tightening around my neck. The anonymous complaint was clearly retaliation for refusing their buyout offer, designed to create an official record of problems with my property that could be used to support their legal case. I was still processing the implications when my neighbor from across the road, Mrs. Chen, came walking over with her little terrier. "Jake, I hope you don't mind me asking, but that woman from the HOA was at my door this morning asking questions about your property." "What kind of questions?" "Strange things, whether I'd noticed any smells, if the dust bothered me, whether I thought the neighborhood looked better before you moved in." Mrs. Chen's expression was troubled. I told her I think you're a wonderful neighbor, but she kept pushing, almost like she wanted me to complain. The pieces clicked into place. Karen wasn't just trying to force me out. She was building a case by manufacturing complaints from neighbors, filing anonymous tips with county agencies, and creating an official record of problems that didn't exist. "Mrs. Chen, did she offer you anything? Money, HOA, favors, anything like that?" "Well," she said hesitantly, "she did mention that if the HOA took over your property, they might be able to extend the community walking trail and maybe add some amenities for the older residents." I thanked Mrs. Chen and went inside to think. These people were more sophisticated than I'd given them credit for. They weren't just bullies, they were running a systematic campaign to isolate me legally, politically, and socially. That night, I sat on my back porch, listening to the creek burble peacefully in the darkness. The sound was hypnotic, soothing, the kind of white noise that helped you think clearly. And that's when I realized exactly what Karen had handed me, the perfect weapon for my own revenge. The creek wasn't just a water source for the subdivision's irrigation systems. According to my property survey, I owned the water rights for the entire natural watershed that fed it. More importantly, as a hydrological engineer, I knew exactly how to redirect, control, and manipulate water flow. But first, I needed to understand exactly how the subdivision's water systems worked. What I discovered during my midnight reconnaissance mission was going to give me more ammunition than I'd ever dreamed of. Midnight discoveries. At 2 a.m., the subdivision was dead quiet, except for the hum of air conditioners and the occasional bark from a restless dog. I'd spent enough time in the field to know that the best way to understand a water system was to trace it from source to destination, preferably when no one was watching. Armed with a flashlight, my engineer's measuring tape, and a notebook, I followed the creek from my back boundary through the subdivision's carefully landscaped common areas. What I found was far more extensive than I'd imagined. The creek didn't just provide water for a few sprinkler systems. Over the years, the HOA had built an elaborate network of discrete pumps, underground pipes, and distribution points that fed water to every major landscape feature in the neighborhood. The community fountain in the entrance plaza, the irrigation system for the golf course quality lawns, the decorative ponds scattered throughout the walking trails, all of it depended on my creek. But the real discovery came when I traced the main distribution line to its terminus behind Karen's house. Her backyard was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, terraced flower beds, a kidney-shaped pool, mature oak trees, and what had to be 10,000 square feet of perfect St. Augustine grass. But the centerpiece was a man-made waterfall that cascaded into a koi pond, surrounded by exotic plants and strategic lighting that made the whole area glow like something from a resort magazine. The waterfall was fed by a pump system that drew directly from the main creek distribution line. I crouched behind her fence, calculating flow rates and pressure requirements. The amount of water her landscape features consumed was staggering, probably more than most people used in their entire houses. All of it stolen from my property through fraudulent easement claims. As I worked my way back along the distribution network, documenting pump locations and pipe routing, I started to see the bigger picture. The HOA had spent years, and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, building infrastructure that depended entirely on water from my land. No wonder they were desperate to gain legal control of the creek. By 4 a.m., I was back home with a notebook full of measurements, sketches, and calculations. The subdivision's entire aesthetic identity was built on my water, pumped through my property without my permission, using easement rights they'd obtained through fraud. But the most interesting discovery was the system's Achilles heel. All those pumps, pipes, and distribution points were designed for consistent water pressure and flow. The entire network was calibrated for the creek's natural output under normal conditions. But what would happen if the water source suddenly became unpredictable? I spent the next 3 days researching Texas water law and calling in favors from my engineering contacts. The legal situation was complicated but clear. As the owner of the water rights, I had broad authority to modify the creek flow on my property, as long as I didn't completely eliminate downstream access. The engineering solution was even simpler. By Wednesday afternoon, I had permits filed for a decorative water feature and erosion control system on my property. The paperwork was legally bulletproof, submitted through proper channels, and designed by a licensed professional engineer. Karen had no idea what was coming. But first, she was about to escalate things in a way that would make my response seem completely justified. The final provocation. Thursday morning brought the kind of humid heat that makes your shirt stick to your back before you finish your first cup of coffee. I was reviewing engineering specifications for my decorative water feature when I heard vehicles pulling into my driveway. Through the front window, I watched 3 county trucks disgorge a small army of inspectors, each carrying official-looking clipboards and wearing expressions that suggested they'd rather be anywhere else. The lead inspector was a thin, nervous man named Patterson, who couldn't quite make eye contact when he explained their mission. "Mr. Morrison, we've received multiple complaints about your property. We need to conduct a comprehensive inspection of all systems, septic, electrical, structural, and environmental compliance." Multiple complaints? From who? Patterson shuffled through his papers. Anonymous tips through the county complaint hotline. Very detailed reports about potential code violations. Over the next 4 hours, my property was invaded by specialists, checking everything from the electrical panel to the soil composition around my septic system. They measured, photographed, tested, and documented every square inch of my 5 acres. I watched from the porch, fighting the urge to interfere, while Karen made periodic appearances on her back deck to observe the proceedings. She was wearing white linen again, pristine and untouchable, sipping what looked like iced tea while my life was dissected by county bureaucrats. By noon, the inspectors were packing up their equipment. Patterson approached with the look of a man delivering bad news. "Mr. Morrison, I want to be straight with you. We found no violations, nothing. Your property is textbook compliant with all county codes." "Then why do you look like someone died?" He glanced around nervously. "Because in 20 years of doing this job, I've never seen such detailed, specific complaints that turned out to be completely false. Someone with serious knowledge of county regulations filed these reports, and they had to know they were bogus. What happens now? We close the complaints as unfounded, but—" Patterson lowered his voice. "Whoever's targeting you isn't done. False complaints like these are usually just the opening movie." He was right. That afternoon, I found a notice posted on my front gate, a bright orange tag, declaring my property a potential public health hazard pending further investigation. According to the fine print, I had 72 hours to appear before a county review board to contest the classification. I called Ray Delgado immediately. "Ray, what the hell is this orange tag about?" His sigh was audible through the phone. "Jake, I'm sorry. Someone filed a complaint with the health department claiming your property poses contamination risks to neighboring wells and groundwater sources. But your own inspectors just certified everything as compliant." "I know, no. But the health department has different standards and different authority. They can place a property under review based on credible reports of potential hazards." "Who filed the complaint?" "Anonymous, but routed through a lawyer's office billings, Karp and Associates." The pieces clicked into place. Karen and her lawyer weren't just trying to buy my property anymore. They were systematically destroying my ability to live on it, using county agencies as weapons to create an official record of problems that would justify condemnation proceedings. I was still processing the implications when Mrs. Chen came over again, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by obvious distress. "Jake, I'm so sorry. That woman from the HOA came by again, and this time she had official-looking papers. She said the county was investigating your property for health violations, and she wanted me to sign a petition requesting immediate action." "Did you sign it?" "Of course not. But she said she'd already gotten signatures from 12 other neighbors, and she implied that property values might suffer if I didn't cooperate." My hands clenched into fists. Karen was going door to door using fear tactics and false information to turn my neighbors against me. Worse, she was building a paper trail that would make it look like the community was demanding action against my problematic property. That evening, I walked to the back of my property and stood beside the creek, listening to the water gurgle peacefully over the rocks. In 3 days, this tranquil sound would be replaced by something much more dramatic. My phone rang. It was Bill Hutchins. "Jake, I just heard through the grapevine that someone's been asking questions about your property at the county clerk's office. They're looking for any paperwork that might affect your water rights." "Let them look," I said, watching the water flow toward the subdivision's irrigation system. "In 72 hours, it won't matter what they find." "What are you planning?" I smiled in the darkness. "Remember what you said about revenge being a dish best served with proper permits? But what I discovered at the county hearing was going to make my planned revenge even sweeter than I'd imagined." The Kangaroo Court. The county review board meeting was held in a windowless conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucratic despair. 5 board members sat behind a folding table, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on a Friday afternoon. Karen was there, of course, dressed in her standard battle armor of crisp white linen and righteous indignation. She'd brought back up 3 neighbors I barely recognized, all clutching papers and wearing expressions of practiced concern. The board chairman, a tired-looking man named Robert Hayes, called the meeting to order and read from a prepared statement about public health concerns and property maintenance standards. "Mr. Morrison, You've been given an opportunity to respond to complaints about potential health hazards on your property. Please state your case. I stood up, carrying a folder thick with inspection reports, permits, and legal documentation. Chairman Hayes, members of the board, every single complaint filed against my property has been investigated and found to be without merit. County inspectors have certified my septic system, electrical systems, and overall property compliance. That may be true, interrupted one of the board members, a stern woman whose nameplate read Dr. Sarah Kim. But we have multiple reports from concerned neighbors about ongoing issues. Karen rose gracefully, like a prosecutor approaching the jury. Thank you, Dr. Kim. I represent 12 families who are deeply concerned about the impact this property is having on our community. She began reading from a prepared statement that sounded like it had been written by her lawyer. Allegations about dust contamination, groundwater pollution, and decreased property values flowed in smooth, professional language designed to sound reasonable to people who didn't know the real story. Furthermore, Karen continued, we have photographic evidence of standing water, debris accumulation, and what appears to be illegal dumping on the property. She produced a stack of photos that made my jaw drop. They showed my property, but from angles and perspectives that made normal ranch maintenance look like an environmental disaster. A pile of mulch became mysterious waste material. The natural creek became standing water, posing mosquito breeding risks. Even my gravel driveway was presented as evidence of failure to maintain proper drainage. The board members studied the photos with growing concern while I sat there watching a masterclass in evidence manipulation. Dr. Morrison, Chairman Hayes said, these photos are quite troubling. How do you respond to these allegations? Those photos are misleading representations of normal ranch operations, I replied. The standing water is a natural creek that's been flowing for decades. The waste material is landscaping mulch. Everything shown is completely legal and properly maintained. But I could see the board members' faces. The photos were working. Without context or technical knowledge, normal ranch features looked ominous and problematic. Dr. Kim leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, regardless of legality, don't you think you have a responsibility to your neighbors? Couldn't you address their concerns through simple property improvements? Before I could answer, one of Karen's neighbor allies spoke up, a middle-aged man whose nervous energy suggested he was more comfortable letting Karen do the talking. We're not trying to be unreasonable, he said. We just want our neighborhood to stay beautiful and safe. The dust from his property gets all over our cars and into our houses. And the mosquitoes from that standing water are terrible, added another neighbor. A woman whose perfectly styled hair looked like it had never encountered actual weather. I wanted to scream. These people lived in an artificial suburban bubble where every blade of grass was managed and every natural feature was eliminated in favor of sterile landscaping. They couldn't conceive of coexisting with a working ranch. Chairman Hayes was clearly ready to wrap up the meeting. Mr. Morrison, while we haven't found specific code violations, the board is concerned about community harmony and public health. We're prepared to offer a compromise. Here it comes, I thought. We'll defer any immediate action if you agree to submit a comprehensive property improvement plan within 30 days. Something that addresses the neighbors' concerns about dust, water management, and overall aesthetics. Karen's smile was triumphant. She'd maneuvered me into exactly the position she wanted, forced to spend thousands of dollars improving my property, according to HOA standards or face county action. I understand your position, I said carefully. And I want to be a good neighbor. In fact, I've already filed permits for a major water management improvement project that should address several of these concerns. What kind of project? Dr. Kim asked. A decorative waterfall and pond system designed to manage creek flow and reduce any potential drainage issues. It's environmentally friendly, aesthetically pleasing, and professionally engineered. The board members looked intrigued. Karen's smile faltered slightly. When would this project be completed? Chairman Hayes asked. Actually, construction starts Monday morning. Weather permitting, it should be operational by Wednesday. Well, Hayes said, looking pleased with himself, that sounds like exactly the kind of community-minded improvement we'd hoped to see. Mrs. Middlesworth, does this address your neighbor's concerns? The morning Karen Henderson knocked on my cabin door. I was sipping coffee on my modest wooden porch, watching the sunrise paint Lake Serenity in shades of gold and amber. I had no idea that this woman with her clipboard, measuring tape, and self-righteous scowl was about to turn my peaceful retirement into the most expensive game of chess I'd ever played. By the time our war was over, my humble lake cabin would become the most exclusive gaming establishment in 3 counties, and Karen would be serving drinks to my high-roller guests. The knock came at exactly 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late September. I know because I was checking my phone when the sharp, authoritative rapping interrupted the gentle lapping of waves against my dock. Through the screen door, I could see a woman in her 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a navy blazer that screamed, "I speak to managers," and a laminated badge hanging from a lanyard that read HOA Compliance Officer. Mr. Davidson? Her voice carried the kind of crisp authority that could freeze a charging bull. I'm Karen Henderson, head of the Pine Valley Lake Association's Architectural Review Committee. We need to discuss your structure. She gestured dismissively at my porch with her clipboard, as if it were some kind of architectural abomination rather than the cozy 12 by 16-foot deck where I'd spent countless peaceful mornings since moving here 2 years ago. Good morning to you too, I said, opening the screen door. The autumn air carried the scent of pine needles and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. What seems to be the problem? Karen stepped onto my porch ironically, the very structure she was about to condemn, and began measuring the railings with a tape measure she'd produced from her blazer pocket, like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. This porch, she announced, snapping the tape measure shut with theatrical flair, is in direct violation of Pine Valley Lake Association covenants, Section 4.2(7). Maximum allowable deck extensions are 10 by 12 feet. Yours measures 12 by 16. You're in violation by 32 square feet. I stared at her for a moment, processing the absurdity. Karen, I bought this cabin with this porch already built. The previous owner is not my concern, she interrupted, pulling out a bright yellow violation notice that she'd apparently pre-written. What matters is current compliance. You have 30 days to bring this structure into compliance or face daily fines of $50. The notice fluttered in the morning breeze as she handed it to me, and I caught the faint scent of her overpowering perfume mixing unpleasantly with the clean lake air. $50 a day for 32 extra square feet? I couldn't hide the incredulity in my voice. That's more than $1 per square foot per day. Rules are rules, Mr. Davidson. Karen's smile was as cold as the lake in January. The integrity of our community standards depends on consistent enforcement. As she turned to leave, her heels clicking against my supposedly illegal deck boards, she paused at the steps. Oh, and Mr. Davidson? I should mention that I'll be conducting weekly inspections to ensure you're making progress. Have a blessed day. I watched her climb into her pristine white SUV, where she immediately began typing something into her phone. Little did I know she was already scheduling a meeting with the HOA board to discuss the Davidson problem. What I discovered in that meeting would change everything. First escalation, the research revelation. That afternoon, I did what any rational person would do. I dug into the HOA covenants with the thoroughness of a detective investigating a murder case. My home office, with its view of the lake through floor-to-ceiling windows, became mission control for what I was starting to think of as Operation Common Sense. The Pine Valley Lake Association covenants were a 47-page document that read like it had been written by lawyers, for lawyers, and translated through 3 different languages before being etched in stone. But buried in section 12.4.3, I found something interesting. Any structure existing before the current covenants were ratified in 2018 was considered grandfathered and exempt from size restrictions. I called the county recorder's office, and after 20 minutes of hold music that sounded like elevator jazz played through a tin can, I reached Gloria Martinez, a clerk who'd been there since the Carter administration. Pine Valley Lake, cabin at 1247 Lakeshore Drive? Gloria's voice crackled through my phone speaker. Oh, honey, I remember that porch. Built in 2016 when old Mr. Peterson owned the place. Got the permit right here in my system. My heart rate quickened. So it was legally permitted before the current HOA covenants? Absolutely. Beautiful work too. I remember because my husband did the carpentry. Used genuine cedar from Oregon. I printed out the permit records, the covenant sections, and a timeline showing the porch predated Karen's precious rules by 2 full years. The stack of papers felt substantial in my hands, like ammunition for the battle ahead. The next morning, I was ready for Karen's weekly inspection. She arrived at 8:15 a.m., sharp clipboard in hand, wearing the same navy blazer, but with a different scarf, this one featuring tiny sailboats that seemed mockingly cheerful. Mr. Davidson, I don't see any progress on your compliance issue. She began measuring again, as if the porch might have magically shrunk overnight. Actually, Karen, I have something you need to see. I handed her the documentation with what I hoped was a confident smile. This porch was built and permitted in 2016, 2 years before the current covenants. According to section 12.4, 3 of your own rules, it's grandfathered. She studied the papers with the intensity of a scholar, examining ancient scrolls, her lips pursing tighter with each page. The morning sun highlighted the fine lines around her eyes, and I could almost see the gears turning in her head as she searched for a way around this inconvenient truth. These documents, she said finally, handing them back with the dismissive wave of someone swatting away a mosquito, are irrelevant. The grandfathering clause only applies to structures that were compliant with county building codes at the time of construction. This was county permitted, I said, pointing to Gloria's official stamp on the paperwork. But was it compliant with setback requirements? Drainage specifications? Environmental impact assessments? Karen's voice took on the lecturing tone of a professor, grilling an unprepared student. I'll need to conduct a full compliance audit before any grandfathering claims can be validated. She pulled out a new form. Apparently, she had an endless supply of official-looking paperwork in that blazer and handed it to me. Complete this 17-page architectural review application, submit it with a $500 processing fee, and we'll consider your request for a grandfathering determination. As Karen walked back to her SUV, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and Mr. Davidson?" The 30-day countdown started yesterday, regardless of any pending applications. I stood there, holding the 17-page form, feeling like I'd just been handed the rules to a game where the house always wins. But what I didn't know was that Karen had already called an emergency HOA board meeting for that evening, and the topic was expanding the enforcement powers of the Architectural Review Committee. Second escalation, the board meeting ambush. 3 days later, I received a notice in my mailbox that the HOA board would be holding a special session to discuss ongoing compliance issues in the Lakefront District. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Pine Valley Community Center, a building that looked like it had been designed by someone whose only architectural reference was a DMV office. I arrived at 7 p.m. to find the community center's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps, casting everything in an unflattering greenish glow. About 30 residents filled the folding chairs, and I recognized the distinct smell of burnt coffee emanating from a corner table where someone had set up refreshments. Karen sat at the front table with 4 other board members, her laptop open and a presentation already loaded on the portable screen behind her. She'd changed from her usual blazer into what I could only describe as courtroom power suit, charcoal gray with gold buttons that caught the harsh light. "Good evening, everyone," Karen began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "Tonight, we're discussing a critical issue that affects the property values and community standards we all cherish here at Pine Valley Lake." The presentation slide read, "COMPLIA NCEENFOR CEMEN TPROTE ECTING UIESTEME ENT." For the next 15 minutes, Karen delivered a masterclass in making a molehill sound like Mount Everest. She spoke about precedent-setting violations, erosion of community standards, and the slippery slope of architectural anarchy. Each slide featured photos of my porch from different angles, as if she were presenting evidence in a murder trial. "As you can see," she said, clicking to a slide showing my porch with red arrows pointing to the offending sections, "this unauthorized expansion represents a 32-square-foot violation of our established guidelines. But the real issue isn't the size, it's the precedent." An elderly man in the front row, whom I recognized as Bob Wheeler from 2 Cabins Down, raised his hand. "Karen, that porch was there when young Davidson bought the place. Seems like the previous owner's problem, not his." "Which brings us to tonight's proposal," Karen said, advancing to her final slide with the enthusiasm of a game show host revealing the grand prize. "I'm recommending that the board vote to eliminate the grandfathering clause from our covenants entirely. Effective immediately, all structures regardless of when they were built must comply with current standards." The room erupted in murmurs and shifting chairs. I felt my stomach drop as the implications hit me. She wasn't just coming after my porch, she was rewriting the rules to make sure I couldn't win. I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Excuse me, but don't homeowners have a right to vote on covenant changes?" Karen's smile could have powered the community center's lights. Actually, according to the Pine Valley Lake Association bylaws, architectural standards fall under the board's administrative authority. No homeowner vote required. The vote was swift and unanimous among the board members. 5 hands raised in favor, 0 opposed. The grandfathering clause was gone, erased as if it had never existed. As the meeting broke up, I found myself surrounded by sympathetic neighbors offering condolences and sharing their own HOA horror stories. Margaret Thompson, who lived in the cabin with the beautiful flower gardens, patted my arm gently. "Don't let her get to you, dear," Margaret whispered, glancing around to make sure Karen wasn't listening. "We've all seen how she operates. She's like a dog with a bone when she gets fixated on someone." But as I walked to my car under the pale glow of the parking lot lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than covenants and compliance. Through the community center windows, I could see Karen still inside, typing furiously on her laptop, while the other board members packed up their papers. What I didn't know was that she was already researching property tax assessments and zoning regulations, looking for new ways to make my life miserable. Her next move would be so outrageous that it would finally push me past the point of reasonable compromise. Third escalation, the inspection invasion. The following Tuesday, I was awakened at 6:47 a.m. by the sound of multiple car doors slamming in my driveway. I stumbled to my bedroom window, still groggy from sleep, and saw Karen's white SUV, joined by 2 other vehicles, official-looking sedan and a pickup truck with COUNT, YBUILDING, NSPECTOR emblazoned on the side. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt and made it to my front door just as Karen was leading a small parade of officials around the side of my cabin toward the porch. The morning air was crisp enough to see our breath, and fallen leaves crunched under their feet as they marched across my property like an invading army. "Gentlemen," Karen was saying to a man in a hard hat, and another in a county uniform, "as you can see, this structure clearly exceeds the permitted dimensions and may pose safety concerns for the community." I stepped outside, my bare feet immediately registering the shock of cold deck boards. "Excuse me, but what's going on here?" The county inspector, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes, looked slightly uncomfortable. "Mr. Davidson, I'm Inspector Jim Walsh. We received a complaint about potential building code violations. I'm required to investigate." "From the HOA," I said, looking directly at Karen. "From a concerned community member," Karen corrected, her tone implying that concern for community welfare was a virtue I clearly lacked. Inspector Walsh spent the next hour measuring, photographing, and examining every inch of my porch with the methodical precision of a forensic investigator. He checked the foundation supports, tested the railing stability, and even crawled underneath to inspect the pier attachments. Karen hovered nearby like a supervisor, occasionally pointing out what she considered obvious violations and asking leading questions. "Does that beam look properly rated for this span? And are those footings deep enough for lake soil conditions?" But Inspector Walsh was thorough and professional. After completing his examination, he stood up and brushed the dust off his knees. "Well, Mr. Davidson, I've got to say this is some quality work. Everything's up to code: proper footings, appropriate lumber grades, solid joinery. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "So there are no violations?" "Not from a county building code perspective, no. This structure is safe and compliant." Karen's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that reminded me of an overripe tomato. "But what about the HOA covenants? Surely the county enforces—" "Ma'am," Inspector Walsh interrupted gently, "county building codes and HOA covenants are separate matters. We don't enforce private association rules." After the inspector left, Karen remained behind, pacing my porch like a caged tiger. The third official, whom she'd introduced as a consulting engineer, turned out to be her brother-in-law Randy, who spent most of the inspection taking photos with his iPhone and nodding sagely at Karen's observations. "This isn't over, Mr. Davidson," Karen said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "There are other avenues available to ensure community compliance." "Such as?" She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it seemed genuine, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "Well, for instance, did you know that any structure within 50 feet of the lake requires special environmental permits? And that unpermitted structures can be declared public nuisances by the county?" My blood ran cold. My porch was exactly 23 feet from the water's edge. "Don't worry," Karen continued, already walking toward her SUV. "I am sure a man of your resources can navigate the permit process. The environmental impact study alone should only take 6 to 8 months." As her SUV disappeared down the winding lake road, I stood on my supposedly illegal porch and realized I was no longer dealing with an overzealous HOA volunteer. I was facing someone who would use every bureaucratic weapon in her arsenal to win this fight, regardless of what it cost me or anyone else who got in her way. But Karen had made one crucial mistake in her declaration of war. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Before retiring to this peaceful lake community, I'd spent 30 years as a corporate attorney specializing in zoning law and municipal regulations. And if she wanted to play bureaucracy games, I was about to teach her that I'd been writing the playbook long before she learned to swing a gavel. The investigation, discovering Karen's empire. That evening, I opened a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon and settled into my home office with my laptop and a legal pad. If Karen wanted to weaponize regulations, I needed to understand the battlefield. The lake outside my window had turned the color of dark pewter under the cloudy sky, and the gentle sound of water against the shore provided a oddly calming soundtrack for what would turn out to be a very revealing evening. My first stop was the Pine Valley Lake Association's website, which featured stock photos of happy families enjoying lakeside, living at its finest, and testimonials about community-focused governance. But the real treasure trove was in the public records section, where every HOA meeting minute, financial report, and policy change was meticulously documented. 3 hours and 2 glasses of wine later, I'd uncovered something remarkable. Karen Henderson wasn't just an overzealous volunteer. She was the architect of a systematic campaign to remake Pine Valley Lake in her own image. The pattern emerged clearly in the meeting minutes. Since Karen had joined the board 18 months ago, the HOA had issued 247 violation notices, a 400% increase from the previous year. But more interesting was who received those notices. Nearly 60% went to homeowners whose properties were located on prime lakefront lots, and of those, 80% were eventually forced to sell due to mounting fines and compliance costs.